framing was used, but without create. It was more in light of Al-Qaeda, disrupt, dismantle, defeat. I think as artists, we can actually switch things around and really lift up the create piece. And how ironic that on this day, the last day of the TCG National Conference here, we had something happen yesterday. We have an amazing group of people here with us, standing together also from the Theaters of Color gathering, the anti-racism for white people space, and the various sessions throughout the week. We're all here together, and what can we do? We can try and create. So with that said, I would like to take an opportunity to invite up some of the folks, because something was created, I believe, was it 2 hours ago? Yeah. 10 minutes ago? All right, folks, let's make some art.
If there is anyone who would like to stand in solidarity, please do. Last night, Friday, June 15th, at St. Louis Municipal Opera Theater, known as the Muny, representatives of theater of color nationwide demonstrated the power of collective resistance to systemic oppression against people of color. When those who benefit from those systems fail to acknowledge the ways in which those systems oppress others, it limits our ability to live up to the promises of who we say we are as a nation. When the theater industry allows instances of blackface, brownface, redface, and yellowface, it sends the message that these types of representations are acceptable.
Let us be clear. They are not acceptable and will not be tolerated by communities of color and our allies.
We acknowledge that all American theater takes place on occupied indigenous land, and that in this particular case, the performance takes place in a region from which all indigenous peoples were violently and forcibly removed. Under those or any circumstances, the derisive use of Native American headdresses, ceremonial pieces with deep spiritual meaning for many tribal nations, is especially egregious.
After many years of advocacy and education, we see the need for continued action and transparency around theater practices and performances that reinforce systemic white supremacy in our industry. The Muny's 11,000-seat production of Jerome Robbins Broadway was not cast, directed, or presented with a contemporary contextualization of its painful and offensive racial and ethnic stereotypes. We refuse to turn a blind eye to the actions and portrayals that wound our colleagues, friends, neighbors, and families in the name of tradition.
TCG was immediately reactive to our concerns, and for that, we are immensely grateful. However, the continued silence from our professional theater community at large around these destructive narratives that mock marginalized people only ensure the continued oppression and economic, emotional, physical, and sexual violence against those who cannot access the agency afforded to the dominant culture. Additionally, inaction on these irresponsible production choices results in historically white theaters continuing to receive 55% of all the arts funding. This allows these privileged few to have the power and access to shape the way race and ethnicity are portrayed on stage, further enabling the dehumanization of people of color, women, and the working class.
Theater is the space for communication and for intellectual and emotional process. As artists and agitators, intellectuals and art makers, we are conveyors of the thoughtful, heartfelt inquiry and action to which our nation aspires. As representatives of theaters of color nationwide, We continue in the tradition of the civil rights movement, the women's movement, Standing Rock, Stonewall, Black Lives Matter, and Me Too.
We voiced our dissent against the minstrelsy in the Muny's production of Jerome Robbins Broadway last night. With members of the theater community nationwide, we stand in solidarity with the St. Louis theater community and are here to support your efforts to address the systematic oppression reflected in the Muny's production.
We support artists involved in the production and seek to further a national conversation around these issues. We also encourage the Muny to hold a public forum to address communities of color, to hear our voices and experiences, and to mutually come to a way forward.
We charge the American theater community to engage in sometimes uncomfortable conversations which are often ignored by predominantly white institutions as too difficult to engage in and dismissed as not relevant to their audiences. We are here to assert that this is a conversation that is not only relevant to your audiences, it is essential to our shared humanity.
I'm going to invite Kanisha to join me. And before I give her the mic, I just want to say one thing to my fellow white folk in the room. If you heard that this was happening at the Muny, just take a moment to ask yourself why it wasn't your top priority last night to go there and be there in solidarity. And in that question, a beautiful hope for the future of our field can begin to emerge.
Thank you so much. Okay, I want to say thank you to everyone standing up here. A deep and sincere thank you. I want to say thank you to everyone who stayed present in the room today and listened, because it can be really easy not to, and we appreciate that. I actually would love if everybody very quietly maybe grabbed a seat and got connected to the floor for me, would you? Just to make sure everybody can see. So, in moments like this, we can let shame and embarrassment lead in a way that makes us inactive. I'm going to say that again. In moments like this, we can let shame and embarrassment lead in a way that makes us inactive. We never want to think of ourselves as the people who didn't do enough, so we change the narrative. It's very common, and we have all done it, every single person in this room. So what I'd love everybody to do, we're going to have just a moment where we've talked about in the Theaters of Color space that I've been moderating with some friends and colleagues this past week. We've talked a lot about how we create abundance for each other. What we can do within ourselves and our own organizations, small or big, how we talk to friends, how we hold someone accountable, even that we love in a loving way, and say, hey man, that's not okay, right? So I'd like everyone to close their eyes, and now you're gonna make yourself a promise. An active promise. It's not gonna be a promise of, I hope I do better one day. It's going to be, when I return to where I'm from, I will do this specific thing. I'm going to be very quiet. It can be small, it can be huge, but you must commit to doing it. I'm going to gently bring us back and ask you to open your eyes. And I'm going to ask you to turn to either one person or two people, depending on where you're sitting. And I'm just going to ask you to share the promise that you're making to them and to yourself. Please do that.
I'll tell you what it's been my mission for my company to start. Find the